you touched on repayment there. I was just wondering how does that process actually work? I mean, does the money go direct to you, or is there an intermediary between, you have the asset provider, you have
Yeah. So the operating partner, as we call it. So there are different models. In some models, we collect the money first, actually, because of the pay-go system. We even manage the payment systems. And then we distribute the monies as per contract to all the parties. So if you will, as long as the machine's getting used, we get paid. And in fact, that's the way we started, and that we did everything. Then we realized that actually that's too rigid of a model, because there are many operating partners who were providing assets to, let's say in this case, it was a grocery store and there's a water treatment system. Well, they're not going to run away, because if they run away, they're not going to get any more financing from us. The grocery store is not going to run away. They can't. They're a grocery store, and that machine can't just disappear. So we said, well, gosh, we'll just take all the data, and you just pay us what is owed, and they essentially collect from the grocery stores. And similarly, if the grocery store doesn't pay, they just take the machine away. So yes, there is a risk, but the risk is 1 month of non-payment, right? And so we decided we've relaxed that. So we essentially rely on the operating partners for the most part, based on the data that is provided to us through the systems. We data integrate directly with their systems, and then they repay us based on how much they sold with the data set.
Mm-hmm.
And we're quite happy with that, because again, that operating partner is a long-term relationship. They're not going to run away.
Mm-hmm. And less work for you guys as well. I mean,
less work for us. And yes, there is a risk of non-payment, but that risk is quite small.
Mm-hmm.
If we do $1 million financing, if they fail to pay 1 month, we recover everything, and everything's we basically are out 1, maybe 2 or 3 months, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems as well, another huge advantage is, if you supply the asset itself, obviously if the business does poorly, you can always recycle the asset and use it elsewhere.
Exactly.
So
in a sense, our default rate is technically 0, although I think that's misleading to say that, because what happens is we move the asset whenever it's, the only way that it defaults is if the asset is destroyed.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, talk me through how you essentially, what does that process look like in terms of, obviously a successful business, it's easy, we can just provide more assets over time. But if something's not going so well, how do you approach that?
Yeah, so let me actually start from the beginning, because I think it's useful to talk about our underwriting process. So when we first come across a potential operating partner, we'll provide a small check to assess a couple of things. One, how good their real unit economics are. There's always what's on the Excel spreadsheet and what's in reality, right? So we assess it in reality, and we data integrate with that partner. So we get full data integration into their system, so we see the data coming in real time, along with the payments. And so that's much harder to fake in that sense. You can only fake so much of that. And then we will provide another check, a larger check, to assess how quickly or how well they can deploy capital at some level of scale. And so with the first 2 runs, and that might just take 2-3 months for that to happen, we've assessed 3 key pieces. How good is their data, and how good are they technically, number 1. 2, do the unit economics support? Is there enough margin in it to support them, to give a good wage to the operators, and to deliver our returns? And 3, can they deploy this capital at some level of a scale that is good for us, good for everybody? And if the answer is yes, then we'll do a larger check. And we may even sign a big deal with them, let's say a $5 million deal. But even in that $5 million deal, we have the recourse or the ability to say, if you don't meet your IRRs, we stop funding. And as you can imagine, there's a constant cycle of money coming in and coming back to us. And so if you actually do a theoretical 24-month lease or a 24-month term with the money deployed over 36 months on many, many different assets, the maximum amount you have is about 40%, 30 to 40%. That's your maximum exposure. And even then, you might only lose 1 or 2 or 3 months. So our actual maximum exposure, if they're like the worst thieves ever, is still only 3 to 4%. of our total deal that we make. So we really minimize that whole risk by essentially doing it in an iterative fashion, but using data to drive our decision making. And we do it in a way that is just-in-time capital for our partners, which is good for them because no one wants to take the money and just hold on to it, paying for it, but also allows us to pull back or increase based on the data that we get in real time from our partners.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, so we talked about how you go through the process of essentially constructing the deals with these operating partners. How exactly do you like find them? I mean, do you have boots on the ground? Is it people reaching out to you? I mean,
Yeah, great question. So we have a team all across Africa, in the north, in the east, in the south. We still don't yet have a person based full time in the west, in Nigeria. But one of our investment officers is Nigerian, and another spent many years there. So we're on the ground, and it's really important to be on the ground. And on top of that, I've been investing in Africa for quite a while, so myself and my team are quite immersed in the ecosystem there, the investment ecosystem. And what we do wouldn't be possible without that immersion in the ecosystem. So that's really important. So the reason we aren't, like, hey, let's do a deal in Indonesia, and here is we're not there, and we don't have the boots on the ground, which is an important aspect of the risk management. That said, the demand is so high that we have so much inflow of potential deals that deal flow is not the issue, right? Now, obviously, vetting the deal flow is a important one, and I've already explained how we vet the deal flow. But having the people there and just cutting through the bullshit is an important aspect of it as well. So, if I were to answer your question more concisely, it's people on the ground, a good understanding of the markets that we're investing in, and just the fact that the supply and demand is so off kilter. There's just so much demand that people are just tripping over themselves to get this kind of financing. According to the World Bank, the financing gap for SMEs in emerging markets is $5.2 trillion. It's massive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, everyone recognizes this as a gap. And the funny thing is, it's not funny. Everyone recognizes it as a gap, and everyone's trying to address it. But few people are changing the model. Everyone's just throwing more money at it, as if there's a unnatural reason as to why this is broken. And I'd like to point out that there's a financing gap in emerging markets, not because there isn't enough money. There's actually enough money. Well, maybe not to fill the whole gap, but there's enough money to do a lot more financing of that missing middle than it's getting there. The issue is systemic. The issue is that the way most lenders lend money doesn't reach that missing middle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Muhammad Yunus came up with this incredible model of banking the very, very, very poor and created a revolution in microfinance. Okay, covered one part of that spectrum. But that model also didn't change how underwriting was done for larger loans either. So most microfinance institutions are lending just like banks do. So the reasons banks don't lend to those groups is very systemic. It's, oh gosh, does it really make sense to spend $1,000 to sending a credit officer out and doing due diligence on a deal for a $10,000 loan when you're going to spend $1,000 doing the loan?
Mm-hmm.
It just basically means you have to charge 30, 40, 50% interest rate.
Yeah.
Which is punitive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the issue. And until you actually change how you manage risk, who gets money won't change. You can even change who gives the money or who invests the money. If you don't change how you invest the money, it won't change.
Yeah, you're talking about the dynamics of risk there as well, and I guess we'll go on to the revenue financing model which you talked about. But from I guess the operating partner's perspective as well, if they're the ones who finance their own business completely, they buy the capital, they take the loan. If the business doesn't work out for them, that's a huge risk which they're facing. Whereas obviously if they're scaling with third-party capital, that also limits their exposure as well as yours by the fact that you own the assets themselves. So
Yeah, and it's a really good point. Essentially what we're doing is we're putting ourselves in the same boat as the companies that we finance. And for many financiers, it's, whoa, that's scary risk, right? We don't have this guarantee projection of taking away somebody's house. But we temper it with this rolling database due diligence model and using data to really assess the risk. And what we're not doing is going and saying, Toby, I like your business. I've never seen it before, but we'll finance it. We're not taking that kind of risk. We're saying, yeah, motorcycle taxis. Yeah, there's 1,000 in Nairobi already. Okay, we know there's the demand for another 500. Okay, we're going to take that business model and use IoT to monitor it, but we can relatively safely predict what each motorcycle is going to do. And again, we use that data and the IoT to track that on a regular basis. So in effect, we're mitigating the risk with data, but putting ourselves in the same boat or taking on that risk from non-performance. But at the same time, that allows us to get much, much higher returns than what we can do with just debt without putting that burden on the entrepreneur. Because the entrepreneur pays only when they make money versus interest, which is, wow, business didn't go so well this month. You have the bank banging on your door saying, why? Right? And that's ultimately the conflict of interest that doesn't get resolved.